Okay, I hope everyone enjoyed the film. For those first timers, I hope it was a really good experience, and for those who've seen it before, it kind of reminded you why it is such an iconic piece of documentary filmmaking. I'm going to be at the roving mic, so if you have a question, raise your hand, make it known. I'm going to just get the first question out there to Marc with the C. That's you. At one point in the film, I think it's Dorian talks about how things have changed, and it was once about one thing, now it's about another, and then it jumps forward only 3 years, and we see how different New York and the ballroom scene is. And I guess my question is, maybe because you're a little bit older than Marc actually, is that, like, what have you seen change in the queer communities in London, and do you think that maybe we could get something of that back, or is there any way to create a sense of community that maybe is not there anymore?
Big open question, thanks. How do you solve a problem like the gay community in London? I don't know. I think what's interesting is that, yeah, we've moved on hugely in the past 20, 25 years. We all know, many of us in this room, I should say, may understand the reasons for that. The technology's changed, bars and clubs have changed, different types of drugs have come into our communities. We become disassociated and disengaged from each other. So I think that, will we go back to having communities like we used to do? Probably not, maybe not. We have different generations come up who interact and develop and create communities differently to the ways that I probably once did in my teens and my 20s. Mm-hmm. So I do think that's missing, I think it's lacking. How do we get back there? I think it's through doing things like this event today. It's me engaging with people like Marc, who are younger than me, and kind of recognising and letting them know that how important community is for our long-term survival as LGBT communities. So I think we've still got a way to go. I'm not sure if we'll get back there, but we'll get back there in a different way.
If anybody has a question, just stick.
Can I just say something quickly on that?
Yeah.
I think I've been going out on the scene since I was about 14. I'm 28 this year, and I think tonight's the first night that I've ever been in a room with so many of the LGBT community, not drinking, surrounded by lasers, long toilet queues. So I feel like what you've just said is that it starts with events like this, where you can get back more of the community spirit and mixing the younger and older generations together. So it'd be really important that I think we should try and make sure that we do more of these events from now on. So, no.
If anybody wants to say anything, stick your hand up. I'll come over to you. Go on down here.
Yeah, hi. You could see in the film a huge amount of things that have kind of been borrowed from that culture, and a lot of, particularly the dance, the dress, the language, and so on. And you see it today performed by a lot of mainly white women in all cultures, but I just wondered if you think that's a good thing for working class black gay men, that kind of mode that came from them is now being used a lot more widely, or do you think it's damaged that sense of community there?
Give me credit. If you appropriate my culture, if you take the things that I create, if you adopt them, you start laughing at them first of all, because when we watched Paris is Burning, I heard laughter in the room at some moments. And that's what happens very often with minority cultures and minority things that we create, that minority groups create, out of adversity, out of need. So I don't mind Madonna coming and taking Vogue, putting it across the world. I have no issue with that. I have no issue with white artists taking culture, but acknowledge it. Accept and say where it came from, because that in itself is empowering. I'm sure many people in this room, maybe, I don't know, I'm making an assumption, didn't know when you watch RuPaul's Drag Race that Shantae comes from Harlem. It comes from young black men and trans women who have invented this, who have created this language, this culture. We want acknowledgement. It goes way back. If you look at the LGBTQ communities going back 30, 40, 50 years, it has always borrowed really heavily. Look at disco, house music, Tamla Motown. All of those things have come from black culture. All we want is a credit. We want to acknowledge that that's where it came from. And that's what will stop damaging our communities. Because what will happen is young LGBT people of colour will look and say, oh God, what I've done and created is really, really valuable. People are taking notice of it. They're not coming in, as you said, borrowing it. I don't want to use that word. They're appropriating that thing. And that's what matters to me.
I kind of have a slightly different view on the situation. I kind of think that from watching that film, you can kind of tell that there were so many different cultures involved in the whole scene. So yeah, it was dominated maybe by like African Americans, but you had Latinas in there, you had Italians, and white Americans in there. So I feel like it was a culture that was created at that time and was dominated by those specific people. Most of it was dominated more by black people because obviously they're the underdogs at that time, maybe still now. However, like one of the main characters is Venus. Venus is not black. Venus was using words like shade and mother of the house and cheesecake and do you get what I mean? So I kind of think that now, 25 years, 30 years later, it should be the fact that anybody should be able to, if you're part of the gay community and you're into the balling scene, then anybody should be able to borrow, not appropriate, or kind of like lean on what it means to be part of the ball scene. And I don't think we should discriminate against anybody because of their colour of their skin or feel that white people have to credit black people more than what it was, because I kind of feel like everybody had kind of like their own little slight input 30 years ago into that. It was just so happens that there was more black people doing it at the time. But as Dory and Corey was stressing throughout it all, she was doing that 20 years prior to the film being made. And she mixed-faced. She's black and white. So I kind of feel like that scene belongs to everybody, and being gay and being LGBT, kind of, you need to remember that like, we shouldn't have any barriers. There shouldn't be any doors closed to anybody. It should kind of be open to everybody to enjoy. And that's kind of how I see the film.
Great, thank you.
Just following on from those comments. Sorry, there was one of the people in the film actually said that what they were trying to emulate in their performances and in the way that they looked and so on was white female culture, and the dynasty stars and all of that. Do you think that's now changed in the black community, where you're able now to find more of what you want to be for what you want to be, rather than trying to emulate other things? And if not, what can be done to allow that to grow more?
Growing up on the scene, I've never ever tried to emulate to be anything more than myself, to be honest. But I've always kind of been like that as a kid. So I went to a school which was mixed, like there was all different cultures there. My family are I live with my mother, who's Jamaican, or I did live with my mother, who's Jamaican, but my dad's Nigerian. But my mother's side of the family have always kind of been open to learning all different cultures. And so I have half Indian cousins, half English cousins, half Greek cousins. So I've always kind of known who I was. So for me, growing up on the gay scene, I've always, like my group of friends are all pretty mixed, we're all diverse. I don't just hang out with other black gays or only white gays. I'm just like, if I like you, I like you. If we get along, if we've got the same kind of common interests, that's what's kind of really mattered to me. So I totally get that there are gays, especially black gays growing up, who feel that they don't have an identity on the scene. I think it's just about who you hang out with and who your friends are and what scenes you socialise in. And literally can just take it from there. I would never want to aspire to be a rich white woman. But I would never really want to aspire to be a rich black woman either. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll still be rich within myself. And that's by, kind of letting in all different types of cultures and ideas into my mind.
I mean, I think there are a couple of things going on in the questions you've asked and in the discourse. And speak to a couple of friends and colleagues in the break. What's interesting is that all of the people in that aspire to white America and aspire to a particular type of patriarchy and a particular image around capitalism as well. These people want what they perceive to be the American dream. So if we look at Octavia, when she's talking about the models in her room, there is probably only one black model in those pictures. When the characters are talking about who they aspire to be, it is about being dynasty and the Colbys and all these ideals, and I do think that's problematic, and I do think that the filmmaker misses a trick by not discussing those issues. Now, I think Marc makes a point about identity and what does it mean for us as black LGBT people and how do we identify and what groups we fit in, and I think what's really been demonstrated here is a generational gap between us. For me as a black man growing up in the 70s and 80s, coming out in the 80s, my natural alliance was with other black men because I was ostracized from the white community. But now I see younger men coming up who have really different relationships with their sexuality, with their race, and how they all intermix and get on with each other.
So I didn't realise that between ages of like 14 and 16, I thought I was the only black gay on the whole scene. In the village. It wasn't until I got to heaven one time, I think I just finished year 11, and walked into the R&B room and saw two Buster men getting down on the dance floor, and I was like, it blew my mind, because I thought I was alone out there, so... And then I became part of this community, but there were black gays, there were white gays, there were Asian gays, everybody was there. It was all about the love of music. But I definitely feel that growing up as a black gay man in London is completely different to what it would be growing up as a black gay man in America. The same way as being black in England is completely different to being black in America. I feel like there's a lot of struggles that I haven't faced or had to deal with that right now people will look at Baltimore right now. It's a completely different society to what we live in. So I feel like this film represents 1980s black America, whereas maybe it's time that we do something that kind of represents now for England.
I've got a question right here.
Okay, my question, touching on the themes in there that were touched on about violence and AIDS, and they were mentioned, but they weren't really confronted. They just sort of existed. And I want to ask what your view is on where we've kind of returned to that with regards to the growing hepatitis C epidemic we're facing in London, the growing drug addiction, and the growing numbers of HIV, and the growing awareness about mental health. How would you tell people in our community to respond to people such as myself who are HIV, hepatitis C positive, and live with mental health problems and might have problems with addiction?
So what would you say?
How would you expect people to respond to these problems, and how can we confront them?
I mean, that's a massive question. I mean, I think that my immediate response would be, we need a multifaceted approach. We need a multi-pronged approach. We can't just deal with one issue. So we can't do it with just being positive. We can't just do it with your hep C. We can't just do it with your drug addiction. You are a whole person. We are a whole people. And I think when we look at our communities and what's happening, we need to address them holistically. So we have these big conversations in our community right now about chemsex. And let's deal with chemsex. Well, why are we not dealing with the root problems? Why are we not dealing with the fact that our community and our scene is slowly being eroded away for a variety of reasons? And let's address those things. Okay, so it's about looking at all of us holistically as human beings who have a range of issues that need to be dealt with. And that's, for me, is the way we approach our future.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like maybe 30 years ago when Pride, things like Pride first started, there was a lot more sense of community back then. People were coming together to fight for a cause, whereas over the last 30 years since then, it's kind of like, oh, we've got it now. So everyone's kind of forgotten the struggles and the fights people have actually had to go through to enable us now to be able to enjoy society as it is. So what's now happened is that the gay scene has got lost again, but we've climbed back into the closet ourselves, if almost. We're buying into to the aesthetical things of what it means to be gay, like going to the gym and taking your top off and having that picture taken at room service, instead of kind of, no, do you know what I mean? Instead of kind of like putting back what we've learned into like the younger generation of the LGBT community. So you've got a lot of children that come out at like 14, 16 years old who think they know what it means to be gay because they can pop into Soho, pick up a free magazine like QX or Boys magazine and flip through that. And I don't think those free magazines or us as gay men that have been on the scene for a while kind of push forward doing events like this where it doesn't mean you don't have to go to a club and take your top off and get really high on drugs to be gay. You could come to an event like this and watch a film and talk and discuss and learn from your elders. And I feel like the more that we push that kind of idea forward, that will then help with talking about things like HIV and hepatitis C and mental health issues, because you're not going to talk about that high on methadone on the dance floor of fire. Whereas we could do that now. Like, do you know what I mean?
I think it's about the erosion of queer spaces as well.
Yeah.
And what is the definition of queer space? Is it a bar owned by a big company where the drinks are £7, or is it a space like this where we can all be together?
I mean, just before we move on to the next question, I mean, I was reflecting the other day in prep for this about where, I mean, social spaces, queer LGBT spaces are slowly disappearing in London. And I did some just thinking back, and I thought, well, where is there a safe social space for me as a black gay man to go to in my city? And I can go to lots of mixed places, which is cool, that's great, and all the rest of it. If I want to be around my brothers, there is no way for me to do that in London, nowhere. And that is an issue, and we need to think about that.
So can I do something? Oh, cool.
Question just over here.
Sorry, I just wanted to go back to what you were saying about New York and the 80s and the sort of consumerism that sort of crept in. But before that, in the 70s, at the beginning of gay liberation in New York, there was a group of black drag queens who called themselves the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaires, stars, in other words. And among them was Martha P. Johnson, who was one of the original black drag queens in the Stonewall Bar. And Martha was quite a big figure on the west side of New York, down by the piers, and he was a mother to a lot of those kids down there, and was also a well-known figure down there, and a friend of Vito Russo as well. And those were different times. Then it was political, then it was screaming and demanding your civil rights and stuff. And yes, that passed, and then it came consumerism. And that was just a fact of life. And the advent of a capitalist society, which was going more and more right-wing after the more sort of revolutionary and liberal 60s. And if I might be just a bit pedantic, Gaylib started here in London in 1970, so it's actually 40 years, not 30. Sorry, but these things matter in the end.